Alright guys, welcome back. Hope you're all having a great day, and today what we're going to be doing is, now that I've pretty much covered all of the individual features themselves within franchise mode, I want to just kind of go back and give my overall impressions on how things are looking this year, and then I also want to get into where CFM goes from here and how I feel about that. So first off, I'm just going to run through the features again quickly and just hit on some things, and then we'll get into the overall impressions. So first off, starting with custom draft classes, obviously one of the top community requests. So what I say really doesn't mean much one way or another here. At this point, I don't really know if I'll end up using this feature, but I'm glad it made it in because, like I said in that custom draft class video, it's something that needs to be in there, and it does make franchise better. And if you're building the ultimate franchise mode, a feature like this would be something that is definitely included in that. So it's always going to be a good thing when you get those kind of things in the game. And then on top of that, it's a positive sign that they're listening as well and is able to prove to people that if we come together and request certain things like this, it stands a better chance of getting into the game. Moving on to schemes and player archetypes, it's good to see these things finally matter and have a function. This is really what these things should have been when they were first implemented, but I think this is a good base here to build on, and this falls in line with one of the things that I'm always talking about when it comes to building CFM and its features, and that's designing features that can tie into multiple areas of the game and the mode. And I think this definitely has potential to do that moving forward, whether it be with coaching staffs or coordinators or things like that. Player archetypes is another thing where hopefully as we progress forward, we'll see that expand to include some more player types and more potential player differentiation. Then we get to skill points and the progression system, which again is probably my favorite thing out of everything this year. Moving away from that free-for-all progression system to a more restricted and random system is something I'm a huge fan of, and ridding of a lot of that monotonous micromanagement that XP provided is a great move in my opinion. I still have significant issues with some of the way XP can be accrued, but another huge positive is going to be the reduction of XP gained from awards, and moving further away from relying on performance and awards and having those things be able to heavily dictate a player's career arc is something I really hope that they continue to do. And then you also factor in the fact that regression has also been tuned away from that more static nature, which allows it to be more dynamic, and that's another one of those things that could go under the radar as being a really nice change this year. All in all, it's not perfect, but it's moving in a better direction and a good direction in my opinion, and the positives far outweigh the negatives in my opinion as well. On to the new depth chart positions, which is again another nice add. It's not going to be a huge thing for a lot of people, but it's one of those things that I really like because it creates potentially new roster decisions, and anytime you can add to the roster management aspect of CFM and have it also linked to gameplay as well, I'm always going to be a huge fan of those type of things. The most interesting part of this for me is going to be seeing how well the AI actually utilizes these spots, but outside of that, there isn't really anything negative I can really say about this. Moving on to the immersive environments, which is something I've already said I'm pretty lukewarm on. I do really like the draft stuff, and the thing that I haven't really considered with this, even with the video I did about it, is what this kind of thing can mean long term. I did touch on it a little bit with the draft and how that could lead to some really cool stuff down the line, which is an interesting thought, but with the main CFM hub and the coach's office stuff, that just doesn't do anything for me this year. Now maybe down the line in a couple of years there's something really cool that is a result of implementing this kind of thing this year, but just for me personally, I can't really think of a way that they could take it that would drastically change my opinion on it, and I would have much rather seen a UI overhaul revolve more around focusing on league information than showing a 3D rendered coach in his office. And then lastly, there's snapshot, which is something that I personally really like and think has a lot of potential if utilized correctly. It's not a core franchise feature or really even a necessary one, but it can be one of those things that touches and adds to multiple areas, which is always a good thing and something I'm a big fan of. A couple other things I wanted to hit on, one being the changes to CPU play calling. This has the potential to have a huge positive impact on franchise mode, especially for someone like me that plays the CPU exclusively, and could end up quietly being one of the best changes to the entire game in my opinion, depending on how well it's executed. Another thing is some of the presentation elements added that I talked about in my last video. The halftime stuff, keeping you in touch with scores from around the league, is a nice add, and is something that should be able to be built upon as well. And then continuing to build commentary around CFM should continue to really pay off for franchise players, and I hope they don't ever stop taking that approach with commentary. And then along similar lines within CFM, you have the news ticker along the bottom, and all of those things that I just mentioned are things that should be able to help a little bit with some of the issues that come with burying the news feed and just that overall disconnected feeling usually present within CFM. And another thing I like is putting the schedule along the top of the screen as well as the draft picks during the draft. I think that's a nice touch. There's also team captains back in the game, which would be more cool if the coin toss still existed, but regardless, that's something that should still make certain people happy. So this is where we kind of come to the crossroads with my thoughts on these features and my overall thoughts on CFM. But first, I want to show a Twitter poll that I put up the day that the franchise blog released, and I asked people whether they loved, liked, were neutral on, or hated what was in the franchise blog. I put it up for a week and I got 460 votes, which is an extremely minute portion of the community, but I just wanted to talk about it for a second. And one of the most common things that I saw in the replies and elsewhere around Twitter was the disappointment that the blog didn't really have anything new from the article that came out during EA Play, and that was something that I definitely saw coming and kind of understood where people were coming from in that regard. But just looking at the poll and seeing that the majority of people were positive about CFM is something that I really liked seeing, and the way the poll wound up actually lines up pretty much exactly with how I felt about things overall. Obviously, when you go back through everything that I've talked about, my impressions on just about everything have been positive. The only things I really have mixed feelings on is the immersive environments, because I just feel like that was a big missed opportunity, and then custom draft classes as well, simply because I don't really know if that's something I'll actually use or not. But when I look at things overall, there's a lot to like and a lot that I do like, but not too much that I really love, and then there's also barely anything that I really hate either. So that's what makes things kind of weird when it comes down to my overall impressions, in that there's nothing really this year where I can say that's a bad feature or I don't want that to be in the game, because there really isn't anything like that, which is why when it comes to each individual feature, my impressions were pretty much all positive. But when I look at the whole picture, it gets really tough, because when I look at what was done last year for Madden 18, which was hardly anything, and then Madden 17, Madden 16, going all the way back to basically Madden 13 when CFM first became a thing, I'd say that this is probably the best year we've had in terms of features out of all of those years. Now obviously the standard that's been set isn't exactly that high, but it's still a lot better to have years like this than it was to have years like any previous year, really. But then when I look at CFM as a whole, I can't help but feel like a lot of these features are more so kind of fringe features rather than being things that really help out that core of the mode, which is what I've always thought to be CFM's biggest problem. The schemes, player archetypes, and player progression definitely fit more into that category, and I think the best part about those things is that they're all cohesive in that they work together and they play off each other, which probably helps explain why I like those things most. But while that does play into the core of the franchise mode with progression and schemes, it's not something that really changes the CFM experience too much from last year or from the last several years, really. And that's kind of the theme that I kept coming back to the more I thought about things. When I look at the overall picture and my overall feelings towards this year, I think what's really missing the most is that feature or group of features that makes CFM truly feel different or provides people that have found it stale over the years with something new and fresh to deal with. Custom draft classes does this slightly, but even with that, the only real interaction you have with those prospects and those potentially new created players in scouting remains unchanged and is still an extremely shallow experience. So with that, you're changing the players, but again, you're not really changing the experience at all. With the schemes and the player archetypes and the depth chart positions, you now have something that is functioning and encourages you more than ever to go after certain types of players and think more about the decisions you're making. But that overall process and journey to acquiring those players is something that is still completely unchanged as well. And that's what I mean by these kind of things being fringe features, because they kind of live on the outside, and without having a lot of those core franchise elements or core franchise features, you're still leaving yourself open to this hollow experience where you're left still wanting more or saying it isn't enough, even though you have positive feelings about what's being added, because ultimately there's still this lack of depth present within the mode. So when it comes down to it, if you're gonna ask me, is CFM good? In my opinion, no. It still has a long way to go, and the reality is I'm not sure they could have put together any kind of feature list this year that would have changed that answer. That's just the nature of where we're at right now, and that's something I've stressed since I created that CFM post. It's not gonna happen overnight. You're not gonna right the ship in 1 year. That being said, was this a good year for CFM? Absolutely. As someone who's been one of the harshest critics of the mode, I think this is, like I said, probably the best year in terms of features that it's ever gotten since becoming connected franchise mode. Is CFM better this year? Again, in my opinion, absolutely. Is it as good as people might have been hoping for or expecting? Probably not, but that's going to depend on each individual. But my biggest takeaway from everything goes back to what I said before, in that there really isn't anything at this point that I can say is a bad feature or that I wish wasn't in the game, and that's a drastic departure from how I've normally felt at this point with CFM over the years. I go back to stuff like big decisions, play the moment, drive goals, confidence, XP from awards. The list goes on and on of these things where basically as soon as I read about them in the blog, I was frustrated and didn't like them, and I feel like there's nothing really like that this year. Would I rather have seen other features in over some of the stuff this year? Of course, but no matter where my priorities lie or how I feel about CFM as a whole going into this year, I want CFM to continue to have more years like this year, and CFM needs to continue to have more years like this year to get it to where I would like it to be. So lastly, the question has to obviously be, where do we go from here? And at this point, it's impossible to know that answer, but my hope is that it continues along the same sort of direction as this year, because one of the things I've said multiple times is that if you have good years in terms of features, it's not going to take long, or it doesn't take long to make up ground. And the main thing I want to see moving forward is just a concerted effort to build on features each year rather than implementing them, letting them just sit and then moving on to something else. And part of that includes integrating new features into old features to aid in that process as well. And then going back to what I mentioned before, I want to really see a focus placed on that core of the mode. And what I mean by that is, when I think about the core of franchise mode, and this isn't specific to Madden, it's about roster and organization building and being faced with new and tough decisions week after week, year after year, that have consequences and constantly dictate and change the shape of your roster and staff. It's about immersing you in a seemingly living world where 31 other teams are fighting for the same thing you are every week, and the decisions that they make can have an effect on your decisions as well. And it might not be sexy, but the mode will end up being so much better for it moving forward, and Madden still has a long way to go in those areas, in my opinion. But I think I'm going to wrap it up there. Obviously, with everything here, it's all completely subject to change. We're still about a month and a half out from the game actually dropping, so all of these impressions are based strictly off of the information we have thus far. And then obviously there's a beta going on right now, and things can still be changed based on the feedback people are providing from that. As the game drops and we get further into the cycle, I'll be revisiting these impressions to see if they've held true. Also with this, these are strictly my impressions, and this is something I'm always going to stress. If you like something that I don't ever let my impressions of something affect that enjoyment for you. I'm not here to push my agenda on you guys or other people, and I don't ever want people to think that because I don't like something that you shouldn't like it either. But as for videos this week, this is probably going to be going up on a Wednesday, which is going to mean that the graphics deep dive will be up tomorrow most likely. I don't know if I'll make a video on that. I'm going to have to read it first and see how much there actually is to talk about. But I'm also hoping to have another Chiefs franchise video up most likely this weekend at some point, so stay tuned for that. Let me know how you guys feel overall about CFM going into this year. What's your favorite feature? What's your least favorite feature? And what you'd still like to see improved about CFM. I appreciate you guys tuning in and listening to my impressions. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and as always, thanks for watching.